Hello and welcome to another episode of Radical History. Today we have with us a very nice guest, Leon Rakov, a political science student.
Lovely to be here with you, Claus. So excited.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about one of the most inspiring characters of or at least one of the most inspiring leaders of the 20th century is Thomas Sankara. Okay, and I forgot to mention this the last time, but if any of our listeners have any comments or criticisms, please let me know and then call me out, and I will self-criticize, of course, as befits.
I can testify
that.
That's what Claus will be doing.
But anyways, yeah. So I think Thomas Sankara is one of these characters. It's just almost nobody knows about, but it's almost criminal that nobody knows about him, because he is so incredible in everything he did and in his life. So who is Thomas Sankara? He was, do you want to introduce him or?
I mean, I can do it. You can do it though, because Claus introduced me to Thomas Sankara.
Yeah.
And that's also interesting because I do study political science. And he is a very charismatic and interesting figure, but I never actually knew about him before. So Claus introduced me to him, and that's why I think you should do it now today.
Okay, well, Thomas Sankara was born in 1949 in the country that was then known as Upper Volta, or at this time it was a colony, a part of French West Africa. And then in 1960, Burkina Faso became an independent nation. It was decolonized, and then in 1983, Thomas Sankara came into power in a left-wing revolution in Burkina Faso, and he ruled Burkina Faso for 4 years, and they had this revolution for 4 years. Then
I think what was important also was that after the independence in 1960, there were a couple of regimes and coup d'etats. But eventually, what was the truth was that neocolonialism was still in place, was still going on, right?
Yeah. That's going to be the power. But what we want to convey is that what did Thomas Sankara do that was so incredible? Why is he one of those characters that out of all the leaders in every country, like there are 200 countries in the world, everyone has a leader at any point in time, and what made him so special? And then I'll just read a few of his accomplishments. That this is absolutely one of the poorest countries on earth. And in 1983, when he takes over, the literacy rate is 13%. Among women, only 99% are illiterate. And then in 4 short years, he managed to do this incredible transformation of the country. And that's, among other things, he vaccinated 2.5 million children against meningitis, yellow fever, and measles. He initiated a nationwide literacy campaign and increased the literacy from 13% to 73%. In 1987, he planted over 10 million trees to combat desertification.
The battle against the encroachment of the desert.
Exactly. Burkina Faso is in the Sahel region, or in the south of the Sahel region, which is kind of where the Sahara desert meets the savanna and the tropical areas below. And this area is plagued by a lot of droughts and deforestation, and
it only got worse with the governments before Sankara, right? Yeah. So they depleted the environment, they deforested great parts of the north. So it was such an important project.
Of course. This is a country that has been ravaged for 100 years by rampant colonization, the very worst that humankind has been able to do. But then he not only did he do this, he built roads and railways to tie the nation together, and he did this without foreign aid. So he did this with the resources that they had available, mainly in Burkina Faso. And this is a country that doesn't have a lot of well, it doesn't have like money to spend at will, like a country like we could here in Denmark.
Yeah, it isn't as rich as in resources also as a couple of other African countries, right? Like in petroleum, it has a little bit of oil, but yes.
Well, he also appointed women to high government position and encouraged them to work, encouraged them to engage in every aspect of political life, of decision making. Like from the home, he was not only was it like very environmentalist, but he was also like an incredible feminist in very many ways. Then he was very strict on the issue of corruption. He sold off he believed that the politicians should not have any more than ordinary people. Yeah. Like he sold off the government fleet of Mercedes, of luxury cars.
And instead bought the Peugeot 205, a very small car.
Yeah, the cheapest. Each government ministry was allowed to have one car of the cheapest brand that was available at the time.
And capping the salaries of the people in office.
Yeah. And they were not allowed to have chauffeurs or to use first-class airline tickets in government.
And I mean, the interesting thing is that he also lived these ideas by himself, right?
Completely.
Like the myth goes that he only had a couple of bicycles, a broken refrigerator, and that's about it.
Yeah,
and
3 electric guitars.
Exactly, 3 electric guitars, because he played in a jazz band.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
These were his only possessions that he lived by. So it wasn't very inspiring, and like a figure with a lot of integrity. And I feel like that's also what, it's not just the policies, but also the way he talks about them, the eloquency with which he does it, and the enthusiasm with which he carries and lives these ideas, which made him such an iconic figure.
Yeah. It's incredible. He didn't want to have air condition in his office because most of the people in Burkina Faso couldn't have air condition at home.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, I think like when you want to sum up all of his achievements with regards to Burkina Faso, it is on the one hand that he pushed forwards the move towards independence. So he wanted to have an independent state and also achieve the well-being of the nation.
Exactly.
So have these two things work together without foreign aid. That's kind of the core of his ideals and his ideas. And it's insane to what degree he actually managed this with regards to all the things you just listed.
Yeah, because we have to remember this is like a history of colonialism that goes so far back. So in 1890, the area that is now Burkina Faso was conquered by the French, and they imposed their colonial rule in which they treated everybody there as their kind of personal property, as is colonialism, right? And they exploited this to the max, and it was one of the most exploited areas on earth. And then when Sankara came to power in 1983, he immediately wanted to create a new national identity. He saw that even though the country had been independent since 1960 under the name of Upper Volta, which is just the name that the French gave it, then he renamed...
Volta is a river, right?
Yeah.
In that area.
Yeah. He renamed the country Burkina Faso, which means the land of the upright man, or like the land of honest man.
And gave the country a new national anthem and a new flag.
Yeah, which he wrote the national anthem, right?
Too, yeah.
As a musician.
So a complete rebranding of a country.
Yeah, but he was trying to create an identity, I think, for the nation, which is so important. And this is...
And I mean, it did work, right? He carried the spirit of this revolution into the very small villages all over the country, which was kind of an important part of his story, that he conveyed the story and his ideals in a way that people could actually rally around them and push them forward. And I think that's like also an important part of his story. Yeah. Which is probably also why he's called like the Che of Africa. So
some people
call him that. We've talked about this before the show. It might be not fair to reduce him to this name.
No, definitely not. He is.
But the charisma that he had.
As a character in his, an extraordinary character, and this. Yeah, But anyways, let's go a little bit back to the history of Burkina Faso and the history of French colonial rule in this region. So, as most people know, was like the French had a huge colonial empire in Africa. It was almost like at least a third of Africa was ruled by the French, and they did as they liked there. They took all the natural resources and extracted a lot of wealth from the African continent. And then during the 50s and 60s, there were a huge amount of anti-colonial struggles in which all of the African countries gained their independence. And among them, of course, was Burkina Faso. But what people don't know, a lot of people in the West think that kind of history ended here. That this is the end of colonialism. This is the end of
to do whatever they want.
Imperialism. But this was, of course, not true at all. And that colonialism only gave way to neocolonialism, which is, well, as some people have said, it's just colonialism, but under it's a rebranding of colonialism to fit the tastes of our age, to be like correct for our...
Well, it might be a bit of soft power colonialism, right?
Yeah.
You use the influence of the market, of capitalism, to continue the influence and that you exert over a country, but you don't have a military force stationed there that then physically makes people do something.
Exactly.
But still, by other means, you kind of achieve the same goal, which is that the country is not free to do whatever it wants.
Yeah.
But it is still tied in many ways towards their former colonizers, and this is what then Sankara fought against.
Yeah, of course, the main purpose of colonialism and imperialism is the extraction of wealth, and then this colonialism is to do this by direct military occupation, and neocolonialism can be very well summed up what neocolonialism is in French West Africa by reading after this pact. This is called the Colonial Pact. After after the countries in the former French colonies regained their independence, they had to sign certain treaties which binds them like legally and financially to France. And this I will read you now like the terms of the so-called Colonial Pact.
Which is interesting because that's a part of the story that a lot of people don't know about, right? That's kind of what you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It conveys the picture that these countries are free now. They can do whatever they want. And if something goes wrong, if something goes off, then that's due to their lack of working ethic or whatnot. But actually what this shows is that there were a lot of constraints put on these countries that had some effects that showed up way later and still do. But because the Colonial Pact here, which I mentioned now, it's still in force. It's completely in 14 countries in former French Africa. This is still in force, both in Burkina Faso and all the neighbors like the Ivory Coast and Mali and Mauritania and so on. And the Colonial Pact goes as follows. It takes possession of the foreign currency reserves of all of these African nations. And this means that the foreign currencies reserves of these countries is stored in the French National Bank in metropolitan France, which that's pretty weird, right? And also it says that the strategic raw materials of these countries, for instance, uranium in Mali or in Niger, is reserved for use in French nuclear power plants. Or similarly, that strategic raw materials are controlled by France. It says that France has the right to station troops in all of these countries and has the right of free passage for its military, which
today we have like several thousand French troops in the Sahel region and in military bases from, Djibouti to Senegal.
And I mean, imagine what implications this has on the sovereignty of a state. I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah. The colonial pact also demands that all military equipment be acquired from France, that France participates in the training of the police and the army, that French businesses, this is very crucial, French businesses be allowed to maintain monopoly enterprises in key areas like water, electricity, ports, transport, energy, etc. And it requires that the award of government contracts in African countries, then French companies should be considered first. So, in essence, it keeps all of these countries as kind of a market for French
products,
corporations and corporations, yes. And not only that, but this is also a very crucial part. The African states must make a contribution to France each year for the infrastructure created by the French colonial system and left behind when independence was gained. This is the colonial debt. And this is like...
And also, which is insane, right?
Yeah.
I mean, imagine there's this colonizing country, France, that then goes to Upper Volta, or whatever it was called back then. And then it sets up by force, like streets and infrastructure and whatnot. I mean, it was not like the people applied or the countries applied for France to actually build these things up. And then afterwards, when they leave, after having depleted the countries and used a lot of people as slave workers, basically, they say, well, now you're free, but you also have to pay for the things we've built that kept this colonial apparatus going, right?
Yeah.
So it is insane.
This is crazy, and we'll see later in the show as when we talk about what happened to Thomas Sankara, what happens when you choose not to pay these debts. It doesn't end well. Yeah, and these policies are of course enforced by France. They have both their French intelligence in Africa called the African Cell, which operates in all the previous French colonies, and the Foreign Legion, which is a famous, like the French mercenary army that conducts a lot of coups and stuff like that. When things don't go their way, they will act for the highest bidder, which is usually France. Yeah, but then we have Burkina Faso. So in 1918, this is in the Sahel region. It's previously Upper Volta, and it has 8 million now called Burkinabe people.
Burkinabe,
yeah. Yeah. So
I mean that. Yeah, I think you have to emphasize that this was the background.
Yeah.
For Thomas Sankara's rule, right?
His rise to power.
His rise to power. You have nations that were colonized at the beginning of the century, and then eventually they were set free. But people eventually found out that this freedom actually comes with a lot of ties. And Thomas Sankara was one of these figures who rallied around this unfairness and created political momentum around it. And this then escalated or exploded in 1983 with his rise to power.
Exactly, yeah. He was first in the military.
Which is kind of interesting because why would, nowadays at least, one could ask, like, why would a progressive figure such as Sankara join the military? Because nowadays, if I, in Copenhagen or like in Denmark or in Germany, I would like to bring forward progressive politics, I would not sign up for the military. At least not, that's not the logic, I think. But back in the day, the military was actually seen in Burkina Faso or in Upper Volta, was seen as this incorruptible institution that could actually fight effectively against the bureaucracy and against the corruptive elites that would just accumulate their own wealth and not give anything back to the people. And so that's why he joined the military as a means of furthering or following his goals of fighting corruption in that area.
Yeah. He also traveled to Madagascar and to
which was very inspiring. That's when he read Marx and Lenin for the first time, and he got to see the revolution there. Yeah,
and he was very inspired by this, and I think he was also very inspired by this Pan-African Marxist ideals by W.E.B. Du Bois or Kwame Nkrumah, and these very, very important characters in Pan-African Marxism. Pan-Africanism is kind of this idea that the anti-black racism in Europe and in North America and in South America is kind of connected with the perception of Africa as a continent. Like the fate of all people of African descent is linked together, and that they should have a common solidarity, which is of course very, very nice, very important. And
and also the idea that they have to unite in their struggle to fight for the rights and their independence.
Of course.
So that's kind of obligatory for them in order to be successful, that they have to join forces to make change happen. And I mean, but we'll cover this later, but that's also what he talked about, right? When he's talked about foreign debt and the odious debt. And he said that the African states should just not pay for it anymore. But he also said that if Burkina Faso is the only state that goes through with it, then I'm going to be a dead man the next year. So it's either all of us trying to work this through and work for this achievement, or we're just going to be singled out and put out of office, or
exactly
something else might happen. And so it is important, this idea that we need to stand united against neocolonialism, because otherwise it's just going to continue.
This is completely true. That you have to be united. And then, like, of course, I feel like we could be subject to criticism here, like being two white guys sitting here talking about this. But what I want to focus on is this is so criminal that people don't know the history of this. Like, you need to know the history in order to to appreciate how bad it is. Like, if you don't know the history of colonialism, then your picture of the world is incomplete. Then you have no opportunity to understand how bad it is. Like what was shaped all the events of the world.
We might not be the best people to tell the story, but what we can do is get people thinking about it, so that it can initiate a research process that then leads further. And I think that's the goal, maybe.
I think the Danish education, or I think Norwegian education, it really fails. Like, not only do we not learn about all of these heroes of the liberation struggles in school and in our daily lives, but even you, who studied political science for 5 years here at top universities, it's never mentioned.
No, but that's what I meant earlier, when I talked about it. I never stumbled upon Thomas Sankara in my research whatsoever. Like, you introduced me to it, and so in preparation for this show, I talked to a couple of other students whether they ever heard of him, and all of them said no. And what's even worse is that when I asked them whether they know of any other inspiring political figure that kind of motivates them to take action and to stay strong in whatever fight or cause they're going for, they could barely give me an answer. And I mean, these are political science master students. So the question is, do we need more of this? Do we need to have more? Do we need to talk more about inspiring figures that actually fought for something than just focus on what went wrong and just cut off important parts of our story, of the story of the world? Because
like, so many of Sankara's ideas are so valid and relevant for us today. That's exactly what we need now with all of the problems, environmental problems. I think that's the next subject we should get into, like the environmentalism of Thomas Sankara. And this is really, with climate change just escalating year and year, and the leaders of the world doing next to nothing about it. I think it's very interesting to see what this man in the poorest country in the world basically managed to do in only 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, you sent me the one text, and it was broadly about his battle against the encroachment of the desert, which was basically about planting trees. So the state sponsored the planting of trees everywhere, but what they also did was connect the ceremony of tree planting to other ceremonies. So whenever there was a wedding or whenever someone was baptized, they would actually, as a part of the ceremony, plant more trees. So they would weave it into the social structure and also the events that would take place. And the idea of we need to preserve and work for nature and work with nature. And the essence of this article was that Sankara said in one of his speeches that we need to think about or rethink the way how societies, humans, and nature and the environment interact and how they work together. And this is so this is what we need to talk about today. And this was back in the 1980s. And I mean, it is the central message of the Anthropocene discourse that we're having right now. Like, what is our role as humans on Earth? And it's insane and inspiring and interesting that a figure such as Sankara already thought about this and did stuff about this back in the 1980s.
Here is what I would read your quote from this article. What he had to say about the desertification of the Sahel region, and then it says, 8 million Burkinabe have painfully internalized this reality for 23 years. They watch their mothers, fathers, daughters, and sons die with hunger, famine, disease, and ignorance, decimating them by the hundreds. With tears in their eyes, they watched ponds and rivers dry up. Since 1973, they have seen the environment deteriorate, trees die, the desert invade, and with giant strides. It is estimated that the desert in the Sahel advances at the rate of 7 kilometers per year. And this is of course very, very moving, and it's against this threat of the spreading desert that he initiates this huge tree planting project that was able to plant over like 10 million trees, like an absurd amount of trees, and not only to plant them, but to try to like regrow the natural forest that had been decimated by both like the lumber industry and the colonial rule. Of course, the colonial rule is about the extraction of raw materials, like such as Burkina Faso produces a huge amount of cotton as a source of export, but it also has like mineral resources and forests which can be exploited for natural resources. And,
he draws the connection between three major points there: the imperialism and neocolonial rule, the environment, and the extraction of resources. And I think what is interesting is that you could still possibly apply this to the situation that we're in nowadays, right? So you have a lot of countries that have to extract resources in order to partake in the market, in the global market, because that's the only way of generating any kind of venue. And so these resources then are used by more industrialized countries to create profit, and it creates the system which eventually will just lead to the depletion of the areas, especially in poorer countries, would just have to take out all the resources they have in order to partake in any way in this market. And so it's still something that might still be attached to the problems of neocolonialism, but also to this idea of poor nations having to extract all they can in order to stay in business.
Of course, like Thomas Sankara himself is. He has no doubt where the blame is to be placed. He has this quote here: as Karl Marx said, "Those who live in a palace do not think about the same things, nor in the same way as those who live in a hut. this struggle to defend the trees and the forest is above all a struggle against imperialism, because imperialism is the arsonist setting fire to our forests and savannas. This is
powerful words, man.
Yeah,
Preach,
yeah.
Man. Preach.
No, but and this is. He also thinks that he has this very democratic idea of how to do environmentalism. That everyone should plant trees. Yeah. Everybody should participate in the conservation of nature, because it is a part of everyone. And he thinks that, especially in a country, in a rural country, or a place like in Burkina Faso, there people are very they rely so much on the circumstances of nature from year to year, and of course then they have they understand of course the need to protect nature.
Yeah.
And yeah. But this I really love this phrase that imperialism is the arsonist setting fire to our forests and savannas. This is
yeah. No, but I guess it's. I mean, that the message is as important as it was back then, still today. That environment and nature are inherently connected, and Burkina Faso is a point in case there, like a perfect showcase how it is important to preserve nature in order for people to thrive.
Yeah.
And I think he drew the connection and showed how nature thereby is embedded in the whole construct of neo-colonial struggle. Yeah. And that was very important. And I think this is what he did with a lot of different points. The same as you said earlier with feminism, how the role of a woman is incorporated in the revolutionary struggles, and how important that is to lift up. I think he calls it the other half of the sky. Like women carry the other half of the sky, because if they don't, then this is not going to work out.
Yeah.
So he manages to connect all of these different points and struggles for more freedom and for more independence, and bring them together. And this is something that he does so artfully, that's very inspiring, and that's why he's definitely a person that one should read up on and know more about, I guess. And
also we should learn from, because like this idea that we should, as each person should live more or at least like participate personally in the kind of conservation of nature is necessary if we are serious about living. I mean, having a planet that is in harmony, right? Kind of we need, of course, to stop the Western imperialism, but also we need to have new perspectives on how we can live in harmony with the planet. And
yeah. I mean, that is one of the central issues in the climate change debate right now, right? How do we, on the one hand, fight climate change as humanity as a whole? Because that's what we need to do, right? And on the other hand, how do we put in the issue of social injustice and historic injustice that has been accumulated, especially towards the southern part of the world, into the system? So can we just say everyone needs to like stop the progression of the use of minerals and resources now, or do we have to incorporate this injustice that has been done and let countries like India or Burkina Faso continue a bit more towards the development goals? I mean, that's
Of course, we have to incorporate historic justice. We need justice. No, that's true. But let's move on to the feminism of Thomas Sankara, and this is also completely revolutionary, like, because he's just so much better than so many other leaders that it's in his radicalism and everything.
But also than other leaders in the progressive struggle, right? Like even for other leaders, progressive leaders in the African continent at that time. It was he was a shining figure when it came to feminism and the degree he put it in place.
Yeah, like compared to people everywhere, like his feminism is radical, and he for the Women's Day of 1987, which he made into a Women's Week instead of a Women's Day, he made a very famous speech, and then which has been made into a book called "The Women's Liberation and the African Freedom Struggle," and in which he has this these very famous quotes. Comrades, there is no true social revolution without the liberation of women. I hear the roar of women's silence. I sense the rumble of their storm and feel the fury of their revolt. And here he's saying that, yeah, of course, without the participation of the women, there will be no revolution. Like, the revolution is bound to fail. Yeah. And this is of course true everywhere. Like, without women in the political movements, if you make some misogynist or macho movement, then of course it's bound to fail already. It's
and to show how problematic the system that was in place before, the patriarchic system that was in place before, is that day, the Women's Day, or the Women's Week in that case, he said that the traditional gender rules should be turned around for one day, and then the man should go to the market, do the shopping, do the carrying of the bags and whatnot. And a lot of, like, in the documentary that I saw about him, there were a couple of women who said that there was kind of inspiring and a fun way to enact this, but it went way beyond these, like, one-time symbolic events. He also outlawed female genitalial mutilation, forced marriages, polygamy, actually, all in order to free the women from what they've been experiencing before.
Yeah, of course, Burkina Faso, like any society, had conservative and traditional elements, and pastors, like very old traditions that are very patriarchal, which he wanted to fight.
And of course, what's of primal importance, that he actually assigned a lot of women into his government, right?
Yeah,
which could partake, which were very professional, and also showed that, like, for the first time, I guess, in Burkina Faso or Upper Volta, that they are part of the political nature of the state. Yeah, he says this. He really wanted women to be involved in every level of the political process. He says this, that the revolution and women's liberation go together. We do not talk of women's emancipation as an act of charity or out of a surge of human compassion. It's a basic necessity for the revolution to triumph. Women hold up the other half of the sky. Yeah, this is your favorite quote. That's the quote. I love the quote. But it also tells another story, or showcases another story of Sankara, which is that he doesn't think that something will be given to you just for charity. I mean, it's kind of it's similar to the civil rights struggle in the US, where Malcolm X said it's not just going to be given to us. We need to take it. And the act of taking in itself is something super important, because it empowers us. It's not something that someone gives to us for a certain amount of time and then they can take it back or whatever. No, it's us. We're going to take it, and we're going to take the measures to get there. And I think this is also the idea that we talked earlier about with the Pan-Africanism, that we as the united continent take back control of these processes and say, stop, it has to change now. And that's kind of the proactive stance that he took. You have you have to take action. You have to take things for nothing will ever be given to you. And this is a lesson, like, all through politics, no matter what what you're fighting for. If you're fighting for change, then we will always be like people who defend, like, the current status quo.
and you have to take what you want, kind of in life, and it's very true. It's very true that, and then he also says, women suffer doubly from all of the scourges of neo-colonial society. First, they experience the same suffering as men. Secondly, they are subjected to additional suffering by the men. Yeah, and it's, of course, we understand where this comes from in a society where the literacy rate, like only 1% of the women was able to read or write in Burkina Faso in 1983 when he took power. And he, of course, went vigorously to work and increased the literacy rates tremendously. And he was very, very strict about this, that girls and women should not be fired from work or expelled from school if they get pregnant, and there will be a pregnancy leave. It was very like, we have to make the circumstances such that women are empowered in every part of their lives to participate on a completely equal footing to men and be respected equally as men in every single way. Yeah. And so that's definitely something to learn from.
No, definitely. I think what is interesting though, or what I've been thinking about, is that you have this very effective leadership of Sankara. And I mean, when it comes to all the socioeconomic factors, he does produce, right, what he claimed he would. He does produce with the vaccination blitz. Like, it's more than 2.5 million people that just get vaccinated against illnesses. It's with the forestation of 10 million trees and all of this. He does perform, but then after 4 years, suddenly he's dead. So how does this story? What factors do come together for this to happen? And I think that is an interesting puzzle where, again, of course, you have to point at neo-colonialism and that struggle, but that's something that I try to wrap my head around.
Yeah, but this is, of course, as you said earlier, what he also predicted himself, because Thomas Sankara, he hated development aid. He said that, at least development aid in this of the kind that keeps you dependent. He wanted, he had an idea of autarky, which is that he wanted Burkina Faso to produce enough food to feed itself, enough clothes to clothe its citizens, enough houses to house its citizens, enough like teachers to teach them, and so on. Yeah. That he wanted a complete like self-sufficiency, because then they would have the ability to make their own destiny in some way. He says that he who feeds you controls you, about food aid, and this is this is very important. And then he also, of course, he railed against the colonial debts, which is like a tremendous injustice, like that has been levied upon all of the colonial war. Like Haiti, for instance, had to pay colonial debts to France for 100 or 50 years or something like this. It's incredible. And then it's just like, it's absolutely appalling, and almost nobody knows that this is still going on today.
And I mean, you read it out before, that even just after independence, they already started out with this debt they had to pay back for the infrastructure that was built before. But even afterwards, in the 20 years that follow independence, from 1960 to 1983, what happened was that you had despotic government still in place, neo-colonial government still in place in Upper Volta. And what they did, they used foreign aid in order to enrich themselves and stay in power. And then eventually, when Sankara came to power, he said that we can't pay all of this debt back. It didn't even trickle down or it did anything to the people. It was just to the enrichment of a few selected people in power. And the debtor states back then, France, for example, or OPEC states or whatever, they should have known. They knew about this process. So now we are made. We have to carry the burdens of a process that was flawed in the first place, and this keeps us from going on and developing. So this whole idea of odious debt. So when there's a despotic regime that spends a lot of money and accumulates a lot of debt, will then the successor and the next government actually can it be put to blame for what has been going on? I think that's a very interesting question. Or should it just be the responsibility of the debtor state to make clear that if they lend money, it should not go to someone who's just going to enrich themselves anyways?
Of course. Like if you ask me, of course, I think all colonial debts should be deleted. It's a ridiculous concept.
Yeah. But it was not just like the colonial debt, but also the debt that was accumulated afterwards by people that were put into power, like puppet governments, and kept on spending.
No. It's entirely true. But this, we will we get to this united front against debt, and that's something that against the colonial debt. Thomas Sankara, he wanted like many of these liberation leaders, he wanted all of the African countries to collectively decide not to pay the colonial debts, because then the West, or whatever who the debtors is, would not be able to force them to pay these debts. But he said this to the African Union, or the precursor of the African Union in Addis Ababa, in a very famous speech about the debt. I would want our conference to take on the urgent need to plainly say that we cannot repay the debt, not in a warlike or bellicose spirit, but to prevent us from being individually assassinated. If Burkina Faso stands alone in refusing to pay, I will not be here for the next conference. And of course, this is prophetic, because he said this in 1987. And later that year, he was assassinated by his childhood friend and second in command, Blaise Compaoré.
Yeah, I think you have to give a little more background. The process,
but this coup, of course, from Blaise Compaoré, it was supported by France and the Ivory Coast.
Because to know the story, I mean, Compaoré, the guy who eventually was one of the guys who let Sankara be killed, was also one of the people at first that put Sankara into place, right?
Yeah.
So he was very enthusiastic. He shared the same goals. He was all in for the revolution. But then eventually, things turned out differently.
Yeah. I guess it is one of these betrayals that will go down in history as.
I think one of his arguments was that Sankara, in his steadfastness and also in the radicality with which he went through with the revolution, alienated certain segments of society. Like, of course, the people in power before that, certain chieftains that had traditionally power in certain areas of the country, they were a bit offended, or at least not happy about the way things were going. And then on top of this, you had the former colonial power, France, with which the foreign relationship was deteriorating quickly, because Sankara said, we're not going to pay back the debt, we want to be more independent and all the rest of it. And so these different forces probably eventually came together and joined in the bloody coup that then happened. Yeah,
it's worth mentioning that Blaise Compaoré, if he after he killed Thomas Sankara, he ruled the country as a one-man show for the next 20 or 30 years until 2000, really recently, until 2014 or something like this. So
and he unwinded or put back most of the things that Sankara had implemented earlier from policy-wise. So it was a major seizure thing that happened in the whole development of Burkina Faso, right? Mm-hmm. It had huge effects. Yeah, because when it gets so enthusiastic about all that Sankara did, and then it's even sadder when you know that afterwards a lot of the things that he managed to implement actually got turned around again.
Well, yeah, this is always the risk, right? In his achievements will of course live on in some way. Yeah, and then
but it was a criticism that was voiced by some of the people I listened to who were very in favor of Sankara, and they said that, I mean, he was just in office for 4 years, so it was a very limited time frame. Mm-hmm. But still, they argued that, I mean, he did not manage to share the goals of the revolution or implement the revolution and its ideals to such an extent in the society that they would not allow for something like the coup to happen, right?
But this is impossible. Like, a coup can always happen, and assassination can always happen. This happened like hundreds of times throughout history.
But that was the argument, that a coup can always happen, but shouldn't it be the goal that even if a coup happens, even if an assassination happens, still the society as a whole has taken all the goals in to such an extent that they will not allow for a different government to get into office, right?
Yeah, but this I think this would take. Well, it is a very hypothetical, but
it is an interesting argument. Yeah, it is an interesting discussion to have.
Coups happen all over the world. Like, it happened. It's not that long ago. Now we're talking about the 80s, but like in the 30s and 40s in Europe, of course, there were lots of things happening. So
but it is the discussion about resilience, right? How much resilience is within a cause and within a struggle and within a society? Yeah, and how steadfast are they in following up with these kind of goals?
It's very hard. Yeah. But of course, what can I say?
I mean, I think one more thing that was interesting was that there were committees for the defense of the revolution, right? So this was these were like the direct democratic entities that were established in order to carry the ideas of the revolution to the very local level. And so there they would discuss things, and there they would talk about, there they would also judge people who were not following through with the ideals. And it's interesting because these institutions played a crucial role also in implementing all the goals that Sankara had, but they were also subject to major criticism, especially from the alienated sections in society. Because the argument that was raised oftentimes was that tribal leaders or local people with a lot of influence would capture these institutions and then use these institutions to further their own goals. And so again, here it is interesting how difficult it is to actually, I mean, even if you have someone as integral as Sankara, how difficult it is to implement these institutions and these ideas to the degree that they cannot be corrupted, and that this is the constant you can't, but this is the constant struggle that needs to go on.
Of course, it is a constant struggle, and of course, like, you can't eliminate ancient power structures overnight. You can't eliminate ancient traditions overnight. Yeah. Like, everything is a constant struggle. And then also, he implemented this land reform, as you said, and like a land reform. So he took from what was previously quite feudal and with a lot of chieftains and this chiefs controlling a huge amount of the land. He made sure that every single farmer or peasant had like some land on which to grow, and this dramatically increased production of agricultural goods, and it made Burkina Faso self-sufficient. But then, of course, if somebody used to have a lot of land and now they only have a bit of land because of this land reform, of course they're gonna like be angry. They're gonna resent this.
Which is a very up-to-date discussion, right? Well, I mean, take a look at South Africa right now.
Yeah. There's lots of. I mean, should Nelson Mandela have implemented the land reform?
Exactly.
Like this is a very. I mean, Nelson Mandela is celebrated in the West partially because he did not implement this land reform, because this would have been very radical. And then,
but one has to say that in Burkina Faso, it proved to be very efficient.
Yeah.
We've discussed it earlier. The cereal production went up by 75% in just 3 years. And even though this might also be due to some other factors, it was definitely something that did work out. Yeah. Like there was more food on the table after 3 years and after the land reform than there was before. And this is something tangible. This is something that people feel. I mean, there were threats of a famine before. Yeah. And then afterwards, suddenly, people had definitely enough food to care about other stuff, which is huge.
It is so important, and this is because also as me and you have discussed before, this need for land reform often corresponds with environmental issues, because if some people own a lot of land, which they farm for some cash crops, and then a huge amount of very poor people are left with the bad lands, then, or like the not very fertile lands, and not a lot of land on which to farm the stuff, then often the land that it was already bad or will become used up, kind of. It will be grassed down until nothing can grow there anymore, and this contributes more to desertification. Whereas if the land is distributed fairly and equally, then there can be produced enough food for everyone. Like Thomas Sankara always insisted that Africa is an underpopulated continent, and contrary to like all of the people today that is like talking about overpopulation or whatever.
The Malthusian debate.
Yeah. But he always insisted that Africa is an underpopulated continent, and Burkina Faso an underpopulated country. There is room for lots of people. For context, Burkina Faso is about 6 times the size of Denmark, and it has today about 20 million people. So 4 times the amount of people. So it's less populated than Denmark, for sure. Yeah. That's nice. Maybe we should call it for today. And
sorry to maybe one last thing, because I was thinking, like, what are the takeaway points from Sankara? Like, for today?
Let's talk about that.
No, because we discussed that many of these issues are important today.
Yeah.
I mean, the environment, the struggle to plant trees, feminism, definitely. So he touched upon many points, but if you want to just boil it down to something that it is about Sankara, like, why was he such a shining, iconic figure? Like, what's so important? And I feel like what is very interesting is that he had a certain moral clarity to himself. Which he defended under all circumstances. Also sitting next to Mitterrand, which was kind of this guy with a lot of more power. And he managed to still be steadfast and go through with his points and raise them. He had a very good way of being humoristic about them, so he would lighten the tension in the room a bit, but still he had certain ideals and certain principles that he would not give up under any circumstances. And I feel like this is such an important point to make and to see with him, especially when you take a look at politics nowadays. He had such an integrity. It's incredible. And also, sitting side by side with Mitterrand, which Mitterrand was, of course, from the French Socialist Party, and he was considered to be kind of on the left wing, but then he went on to have Thomas Sankara assassinated. So that shows you
the extent to which socialism is practiced in Europe, but it's not very solidaric.
And I mean, then one has to bring in the one quote from Sankara where he said that you can kill a man, but you cannot kill ideas.
Yeah.
And there, everything comes together, right? Because also his idea of Pan-Africanism, it wasn't just in Burkina Faso that people were sad and just super sad about this happenstance, but it was all over Africa. That especially the disenfranchised people were like, why, how? It's Sankara is gone. So the ideas do continue.
Of course.
And at least we continue to spread them now today. But hopefully we can inspire somebody to be a little bit more like Thomas Sankara. We need Thomas Sankaras in every country of the world. And Thomas Sankara, he used to say that people shouldn't hang pictures of him on the walls of houses in Burkina Faso, because he said in Burkina Faso we have 7 or 8 million Thomas Sankaras, and that's everybody should follow this example, or be revolutionary in their environmentalism, in their feminism, and in their international solidarity. Yeah, awaken the Thomas Sankara in you.
Yeah. Please do. And if anybody's interested, it's very nice to Google Thomas Sankara, search for him on YouTube, see some of his speeches. He's very, very inspirational, and it's all there. And also, we have the links to reading materials from his speeches and different articles with information about this if you want to do some further reading. And, I hope everybody has still a good Sunday, and thank you for today. And if you have any criticisms, please send them my way. And I will self-criticize on our next program.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, always. Thank you for being here.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah.